This morning I have a special treat introducing someone who I consider a friend from long ago. You've always heard of that adage, it's nice to have friends in high places. Well, this morning that's what I think about when I get to introduce Dave Nichols. Dave Nichols became director of the Missouri Department of Transportation in April of 2013. And after serving as chief engineer for the previous 2 years. Prior to that, he served 11 years as the department's first director of program delivery. Some of you may remember that Dave also was in St. Joseph for a period of time and headed up the Northwest District headquarters here in St. Joseph. He has actually had an almost 30-year career with MoDOT. Nichols is recognized for his visionary leadership in implementing cost-saving measures and producing results for Missourians in transportation. Under his leadership, MoDOT has saved millions of dollars by bringing innovation and competition to program delivery process. On average, MoDOT awarded projects 3% under budget since 2008, and MoDOT's on-time performance record steadily climbed. In 2012, 95% of MoDOT projects were completed either on or ahead of schedule. And something that you should probably also know is Dave's from St. Joseph, and his mother lives here, and I understand he has to leave here shortly to go see her. That's a requirement as to come when we set this up with her to have him here. But it's great to welcome Dave back. I had the real pleasure of working with Dave on a number of occasions over the years, and I would not only consider him a friend, but a real leader in our state, and it's great to see him in the position of director of MoDOT. So without any further ado, Dave Nichols.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me this morning. One of the things I talked to my staff about is I've got to fix that bio. The bio takes longer to do than most of my talks that I give, and it's exciting to be here, to come back really to home. You know, I travel the state a lot, always have traveled the state a lot. That's part of one of the enjoyable things about working for MoDOT is you do get to see and the opportunity to work in various places around the state. That we are one state where there's a lot of differences in the regions of the state, but we really are. Missouri is really one state, and it's nice to be able to see how business is done all around the state. But there's just a special thrill when I get to come back to St. Joe, called Old St. Joe, and it really is just a pleasure to come here. As I was having dinner last night, Don and I were having dinner last night, and I reminisced a lot about being here in St. Joe. I drove around downtown and was thinking about things that were going on, 40 years ago, or almost 40 plus years ago, and but St. Joe is transformational. Things are changing up here. With the business community here, and that's really what I want to talk a little bit about today. I do want to recognize my MoDOT partners here. I brought my posse with me today just in case anybody gets out of hand, but I'd like for them to at least stand up so we can recognize them. Don Wisham's here, and Tony McGoy, and all the MoDOT team. I see your folks over here. All of you stand up. These are really the folks that these are the foundations. We challenge each other a lot. I tell them that you don't want me to get a call from one of our business partners because my answer is yes, so then you're going to have to deal with that, and we'll get business done there. But they do. I hope you see the same transformation in MoDOT that has happened over the years also. What I'd like to talk a little bit about this morning is what's going on in MoDOT, some things that have happened over the last maybe 18 months, some things that are going on right now, and then I want to talk a little bit about transportation funding. It's all about the money, isn't it, sometimes, and too often we have to have that conversation. So, at MoDOT, what's going on at MoDOT right now? Many of you may know, some may not, is we've gone through a very significant, what I call right sizing. We call it our Boulder 5-year direction, and it was a major downsizing and right sizing, we called it, in MoDOT. It's taken us about 2 years. I failed to mention Commissioner Gatch, who was actually on the Highway Commission when we were actually going through the Boulder 5-year direction process. What we did is we reduced our MoDOT staff by 19%, really 20%. You look at today's numbers, we went from 6,300 employees down to, we're at about 5,000 right now. We're a little under where we want to be. I looked at the numbers yesterday. We want to be at 5,106 employees. That puts us at about the right size. And we're under that number today. That's 1,200 people that we have actually reduced actual physical jobs. The hardest part of any of that was having to do layoffs. Many of you in the private sector have to go through that way too often. Government, it doesn't happen that often. Maybe it should happen more. But we actually had to lay off 126 people. And given those pink slips is one of the hardest things any of us have had to do. And I can look around at the MoDOT folks here who have had to do that, and that was difficult. It was very difficult to do. These are good people, they've worked hard, and we just didn't have a place for them at the end of the day, and it was a very hard thing to do. But it was the right thing to do. We had to get smaller. We actually reduced 131 MoDOT facilities, consolidated together to help us be more efficient. We were structured like we were back in the 1920s, and we needed to do sort of a consolidation of our different buildings around the state, and that has worked really well. Last year was really our first real test of it through the snow removal process, and it worked quite well. And so we are at that point now, and then we were reducing a lot of equipment because of the consolidation. We don't need as much equipment, and that enabled us to be able to sell a lot of equipment that was redundant, and we actually have done most of that right now. The key is that it allowed us to develop some cash balances. It really turned into real dollars, $512 million in actual cash that we were able to convert into highway projects. This is real money. And those dollars are actually going right back into the highway program, those dollars we saved to build more projects. Those funds are all distributed to the regions around the state. And the projects that you see going on here in Northwest Missouri are a result of that. So we've really done a lot of work right-sizing MoDOT. And the reason I bring that up, because it really sets the stage as we have had conversations with Highway Commission about, you know, we knew the day was coming when transportation funding was going to begin dropping. This day was coming. We went through a really robust bonding program back in 2004 to about 2009. And it was a very robust program. We got a lot of work done. Built some river bridges around here that you've seen, and now we're open. I just heard that they're going to blast or shoot one of the piers down at the Amelia Earhart Bridge today. And those are the kind of projects that you can only do when you have significant levels of funding. And our funding right now is at really maintenance level modes. Those kinds of mega projects like major river bridges, those big corridor improvements, and we've done a lot of those up here. I remember being district engineer up here, an assistant district engineer, working on 71 Highway and Route 36 and finishing those 4-lane projects. Remember how challenging those were to be able to come up with the funding to get those connections of the state, you know, connecting the east side of the state with the west side, connecting Maryville with St. Joe. And you know what, that was significant to do that, and sometimes we lose sight of the significance and the safety, sending our kids to college and all those things across the state on those windy 2-lane roads. You know, we forget about that sometimes. Those 4-lane roads were very important, and we see the success of that today. The challenge we have right now is that our transportation funding is really going down to where it was previous to our bonding program and even lower. Let me talk a little bit about that. In 2004 through 2009, we had a highway program that was about $1.3 to $1.4 billion with the B word that allowed us to do a lot of big projects, lots of big projects, but it was really just borrowing dollars that we had and sort of using the low interest rates to leverage those dollars to get Missouri moving forward. We did a lot of good things. We improved the conditions of our major roads. Many of us remember driving on some of our interstates and they were deplorable. They were really, really bad. And they're pretty good shape right now. Our major highways, which is really, it's about 20% of our roads carry 80% of our traffic. And those roads were in about 50% in good condition. Now it's over 80%. It's about 88% as a matter of fact. They're in really good shape. But we spent a big investment in there in about 2005, 6, and 7. And it's time to start redoing those roads. And the dollars aren't there. That $1.4 billion program right now is about $600 to $700 million. And it's only that high because we were able to invest those dollars I was talking about from right-sizing MoDOT. And that put $100 million every year into our highway program to sort of keep our head above water. But honestly, we're really in what we call maintenance or preservation mode. And the projects that you see us doing now typically are those projects, maybe a little intersection improvement here, resurfacing type projects. Bridges are a big issue up here, especially in the rural areas, probably urban also. But bridge issues, and so those are really taking care of what we have. It's maintaining what we have. And with the limited funds we have, those next big projects are going to become slimmer and slimmer. We're not going to be able to do those. And so everybody has to go through belt tightening. So we've been through this issue for a long time. Now, right now, the discussion is about, well, what about transportation? Have you got yourself as lean as you can go? And I remember talking to some folks about it and using some comparisons. The Missouri really relies on, and most states are like that, like us, is we rely on gas and diesel tax, what we call fuel tax revenues. 70% of our dollars come from fuel tax revenue. Almost all of our federal money that we get, and in the cities also, it all comes from the tax on gasoline and diesel. And at the state level, it's about 50% of our money comes from gas and diesel tax, and then there's a little bit that comes from when you license your vehicle, when you pay sales tax on the vehicle. That's where we get our revenue. We haven't increased those fees since 1992, or at least we haven't raised the fuel tax since 1992. And I was doing a little research about it when I go around and do these talks. In 1992, the price of gasoline in Missouri was about $1.25 to $1.30 a gallon, and diesel was about 75 cents. Go out and look at now. Right now, it's pretty cheap. It's $2.99. I saw an advertisement. It was $2.99. But typically, it's been $3.50, $3.40, a gallon quite often for gasoline. Diesel's even higher than that. I don't know. I made the mistake and bought a diesel pickup in '99 when it was 85 cents a gallon. I don't know if that was a smart thing to do, but the fact is the price of fuel in 1992 was, and that's when it became 17 cents a gallon. It was $1.30, $1.25, and we haven't raised that. Now it's $3, $3.50, $3.80 for diesel, and it's still 17 cents a gallon. Now on top of that, the purchasing power of that has gone down. Now we're dealing with the issue of, as consumers, we're driving less. We're buying more fuel-efficient vehicles, which are all really good things to do. We're fuel-efficient, becoming a more fuel-efficient country. The problem is the condition of our roads continues, the wear and tear continues to deteriorate, and so we have to deal with that issue. It's not a sob story. It really is just a sign of the times that we're in right now. We've got a lot of benefit out of the fuel tax revenue process, but it's somewhat antiquated today. I think that's the word that I would describe it by, is fuel tax is really not indexed in Missouri. It's not something that grows as the cost of purchasing and building. Think about the cost of building a project in 1992 compared to doing one today. I can tell you the price of concrete, price of steel, the price of asphalt, the cost of labor have doubled, almost tripled in some market areas around the state of Missouri. And we actually find right now that the cost of building a project is really, really competitive right now, and we get a lot of bang for the buck. So it's really a challenge right now with our ability to keep pace with taking care of a very large highway system like Missouri. We're the 7th largest highway system in the United States, 34,000 miles of road, 10,400 bridges just on the state system. Our state system is bigger than Iowa, Nebraska, and Kansas highway systems combined. And they all have higher fuel taxes and revenues than we do. Now, the one thing I'll tell you is we're very proud of our business because we can deliver projects at less cost than they can because we are much more efficient working with our construction industry. So it sort of sets the stage of we've got to do something in Missouri. This is something that's really going to peak at the state level. Now, on top of that, just to make this more exciting for you this morning, the federal story. Wow, you talk about something that's really interesting, kind of sad maybe, is that what's going on in Congress. Right now, they're dealing with the budget, continuing resolutions, the debt ceiling, sequestration. We just talked about that with the aviation folks. There's a lot of issues going on at the federal level. In 2012, they passed the Surface Transportation Bill, which gets our federal funding to us. Typically, they're a 6-year bill. They're a 6-year congressional act. The one they passed was only 2 years. Actually, it wasn't even 2 years because it was 6 months into it when they passed it, so it's only 18 months. We're already starting the negotiations or the discussions about a new surface transportation bill at the federal level, and there's no appetite right now in Congress to have a really robust conversation about federal funding for transportation. So it just shows you how complicated and dynamic things are for funding for transportation, and it is a core responsibility of government. We can debate all kinds of things about policy and politics, etc., but a core function of government is providing transportation and transportation services, whether it's at the local level, the county level, the state level, or the federal level. That's our job to do that. So we have to have a conversation about it, and we are. And so what we have kicked off with MoDOT, we started it in January, and it's our process called On the Move. We're doing our long-range planning. You can't go talk about the need for dollars till you talk about, well, what is the need for transportation in our state, in our very large state. And we've been out talking. Many of you have seen the folks from MoDOT here as our transportation ambassadors with our discussion called On the Move. Anybody seen us out there? We've had listening sessions, we've had mobile tour discussions. You've probably seen one of our vans with this shrink wrap on it, you know, that's all orange and sticks out on purpose. Because we want folks to see and come to these meetings and talk about transportation. Everything from highways and bridges to transit services in the urban areas, to aviation, to port needs. Don't have to look any farther than just right, I'm looking out the back door, pointing out the back door, but over to river, you know, the port access to make ourselves competitive. And we've had lots and lots of meetings. We've been to every county, almost every city of any size, and we've had dozens and dozens and dozens of meetings. We've had over 12,000 formal comments on transportation needs all across the state of Missouri. And what have they told us? Let's talk a little bit about that. What the consumers, the citizens of Missouri have told us, and it's very refreshing to hear this because these are the kind of things that we have going through our conversations too as government officials. And it is, the first thing is take care of what you have before you invest in new projects. And that's really common sense. And it's nice to hear that from the public that, you know, before you go adding a room on your house, make sure the roof's not leaking. You know, that's pretty common sense stuff. And it's nice to hear that is, you know, take care of the highway system you have before you go build a lot of new things. Second one is invest in safety. You've done a lot of good things, MoDOT and your partners, in working on safety, reducing fatalities and disabling injuries. I just heard on the news we had a terrible crash right down here on 229. And there's a lot of things we still need to do. We've made a lot of progress with our guard cable that we've put up, you know, on I-29. I remember I-29 crashed over fatalities. And we've made a lot of progress with a lot of safety improvements through the 4 E's that we call it: education, enforcement, emergency medical services, and engineering. There's a lot of things, those 4 E's working together have helped us reduce our fatalities from 1,257 fatalities in this state on our system in 2005 to last year it was about 826, which was a little bump up from 2011. And we're going to beat that this year, knock on wood. But we're still over 700 fatalities in our state, and that's too many. You know, we're pushing for 0 deaths. Nobody wants to give somebody up to a traffic fatality. So the public has told us, continue to work on safety improvements. The next area, which touches right here, and that is we need to use transportation to invest in areas to help bring new businesses to our communities. And nothing's more important than economic development, job creation, and the connection that transportation has for that. If you talk to, it's called the Missouri Partnership, Chris Chung, I don't know, I know Pat knows Chris, but those folks tell us that when they do research, when a business is looking at coming to a community, 2 things are really number 1 and 2, and they kind of move back and forth. The first one is transportation. What's my access for my type of business to transportation services? Could be intermodal, could be anything from rail to port access, highways, the right type of interchange, having transit services for my workforce to get to the job. Those are the things that are important for those businesses when they're out doing their initial searches. The second is the quality of the workforce. You have both of those here. And you're competing on not just a statewide and a national market, you're competing in a worldwide market. And what the public's telling us is we want Missouri to be up there at the top echelon to be able to compete on this worldwide market and make transportation compete with those other states and all around the country. The fourth area is right now transportation funding in Missouri can only be used for highways and bridges. And that was a good protection that the voters back in the Constitution for highways was put together, that those dollars couldn't be diverted to anything. They had to be used for highway and bridge purposes, and it has served us very, very well. The challenge with that is, and you folks have seen this sometimes when we want to go help with the port project, or we want to go help with an aviation project, or we want to help with transit services. I remember working on some things related to just something as simple as sidewalks and pedestrian access. It's so hard to find those dollars right now with our current funding. And what the public is saying, make sure when we talk about new funding that it covers all modes of transportation. And I thought that would, and it doesn't make any difference whether you're in the very urban areas of St. Louis and Kansas City. It's just important to rural Missourians that they have access to whether it's Oats buses or MeTap or those other types of access, because look at it, we have an aging population. It's not going to be long for many of us that we're not going to be driving anymore, and we want to have that mobility that we have when we have a car. The same thing goes for our real young folks, is they don't have this affinity for driving an automobile that people like me had. I couldn't wait. You know, when I turned 16, I was right down the street down here at the License Bureau taking my driving test. Couldn't wait to get my license. That desire isn't there for the millennials, and that's what we're finding out. So we have to have funding for all modes of transportation. So it was really interesting to see that it isn't just an urban-rural issue. This is a statewide issue. So what it has told us is we've taken all this information, culminated this into what are the transportation needs around the state. I'll throw some numbers out at you. We're actually going to unveil our long-range plan, which is called the Vision for Missouri's Transportation Future. We're going to unveil it at the Highway Commission meeting next month, November the 7th in Kansas City. And in it, it says that over the next 20 years, we have $70 billion, that's B, $70 billion in transportation needs in the state of Missouri. $70 billion. Right now, with the current funding, and that's based on assuming that the federal government's going to stay in business, and I say that somewhat tongue-in-cheek, we're confident that they'll get their issues worked out. They have to some way. That we only have $17 billion over 20 years to match that $70 billion in transportation need. Pretty big gap, a pretty big gap. And as our funding continues to decline, again, based on efficiency of vehicles and the cost of building projects, that's even going to get worse. So we've got to do something about it. And as many of you know, we went through the legislative process last year on legislation for funding for transportation. There's been a group called the Missouri Transportation Alliance. Has anybody in here heard of those folks and talked about it? I know Mr. Gatchek has. But it was called the Missouri Transportation Alliance, and it was a group of business people around the state of Missouri, contracting industry also, to talk about, okay, what are we going to do to go out and talk about transportation funding for the state of Missouri? Because it really isn't a MoDOT and Highway Commission. I say it isn't our role to go out and talk about dollars. It's our job to talk about transportation needs, and it's your job, an elected official's job, to talk about how we're going to get the money. The MoDOT group actually did that. They've been working on it for 4 years, and what they talked to us about is that the polling that has come back, and Pat and I talked a little bit about this morning, is that as they've done many, many polls with large consumer groups around the state of Missouri, over 1,000 people on one of the polls, is that the citizens of Missouri will support a 1-cent sales tax that has a sunset on it. And the sunset is a 10-year sunset. If it's dedicated for transportation, it can be used for all modes of transportation. It's got some other conditions in it. It has to have a very specific list of projects in the regions that will be done. And so there's an appetite out there right now. They actually went through the legislative process last year. It got filibustered and didn't make it out at the last 2 days of session. Very disappointing. But the fact is it didn't make it. And so now this group has reformed as a group called Missourians for Safe Transportation and New Jobs. That's a name that you'll hear in the next few months come out. And they're going through the initiative petition process. That's just the way we do things in Missouri. And so you have to go through the process of getting ballot language put together, signature collection, et cetera. And that process has just started. They've actually filed 2 different ballot initiatives with the Secretary of State. MoDOT has responded with a fiscal note. But the opportunity here is coming. What they're looking at is a November 14 ballot election date. And the opportunity is here. If we continue to wait, our highway system is going to continue to deteriorate, and the appetite for funding for transportation is just going to get harder and harder and harder to achieve. So I don't want to leave you with a downer, but I do believe we have a great opportunity. The polling has come in I say very good. It's over 52%. And for something as big as this, that's pretty good without doing any type of campaigning and marketing about it. And I get asked about, well, Dave, why don't you just raise the gas tax or do tolling or something like that? There just isn't an appetite in Missouri to do that. Even with the gas prices being under $3 a gallon right now, we all know they're going to go back up. But the public right now does not have an appetite to raise the price of gas. And so the sales tax is really the initiative that has the most support from the public. Still a long road to hoe. It's really going to be a tough issue to get through, but we need the communities like St. Joseph, Buchanan County, Northwest Missouri to support this, because it's a win for all of us when we support this. And we'll be out talking more and more about this in the next few months. So.